My name is Camille. I am 35 years old, and for the past 2 years, I have served as a presiding judge in the 9th Judicial District Court of the state. 72 hours ago, on a rainy Wednesday morning at 9:30 sharp, the heavy oak double doors of courtroom 4A swung open. Entering the gallery was my younger sister, Vanessa, wearing an oversized beige trench coat and designer sunglasses, accompanied by her high-priced private defense attorney. Behind them sat my mother, Eleanor, and my father, Arthur, whispering loudly and gesturing contemptuously toward the court clerks as if they owned the entire municipal justice complex. Vanessa was appearing for a mandatory preliminary hearing on 3 counts of aggravated commercial fraud and intentional asset concealment, related to the collapse of her luxury boutique interior design agency. For 10 years, every single time I attended a family holiday dinner, my mother made sure to announce to the table that I was an academic failure who had wasted her life reading boring legal books for $40,000 a year in a dark basement. My father routinely introduced Vanessa as the visionary empire builder of the Vance family, while referring to me as his quiet, penniless older daughter who could barely afford her own winter coat. When the courtroom bailiff called the docket number and announced, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Vance," the entire room stood up. My mother leaned over to my father in the second row of the gallery, scoffing audibly. "Look at that, Arthur. Someone with our last name actually made something of themselves. Too bad Camille didn't have the brains to do the same." Then, I walked through the side chamber door wearing my black judicial silk robe. I stepped up to the bench, adjusted my gavel on the wooden stand, and looked down directly at the defense table. The silence that fell over courtroom 4A did not last 3 seconds. It lasted 21 seconds. I counted every single swing of the brass pendulum clock, mounted above the state seal. Vanessa froze mid-motion as she removed her sunglasses. Her designer glasses slipped out of her manicured fingers and shattered against the linoleum floor. Her jaw dropped, the color draining from her cheeks until her face matched the stark white legal pads on the desk. Behind her, my mother gasped so violently she choked on her own breath, grabbing my father's forearm so hard her knuckles turned purple. My father stood half-risen from the wooden bench, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled onto dry land, staring at the woman sitting beneath the official gold seal of the state judiciary. "Camille?" My mother's voice echoed across the courtroom, shrill, horrified, and completely stripped of 10 years of arrogant mockery. The bailiff slammed his hand onto the gallery divider. Silence in the court. Remain seated and quiet. I did not smile. I did not raise my voice. I opened the red case docket, adjusted my reading glasses, and looked down at the woman who had spent a decade calling me a broke nobody. "The case before the bench," I said, my voice carrying through the acoustic chamber with absolute, unyielding authority, "is the state versus Vanessa Vance. Counsel, state your appearance for the record." To understand why my mother looked at me in that courtroom like she was staring into the jaws of absolute ruin, you have to rewind 10 years. You have to understand how our family functioned for 3 decades. In the Vance household, image was everything and substance meant nothing. Vanessa was 3 years younger than me. From childhood, she was groomed to be the family trophy. If Vanessa spent $5,000 on clothes for a weekend party, my mother called it brand investment. If Vanessa dropped out of 2 different prestigious universities because she refused to wake up before noon, my father claimed that traditional education was meant only for obedient drones, not creative geniuses like his youngest daughter. Whenever Vanessa wanted liquid cash, my parents emptied their personal accounts, mortgaged their assets, and handed her whatever she demanded without asking for a single receipt. I was the daughter who lived in the shadows. I was quiet, studious, and fiercely independent. At 18, I won a full academic scholarship to the state university's pre-law program. My parents refused to attend my graduation because Vanessa had a regional modeling shoot on the same afternoon. When I was accepted into one of the top law schools in the country, my father laughed at the dinner table and said, "Lawyers are a dime a dozen, Camille. You will spend your life working 90 hours a week for scraps, while your sister builds an international design empire. Don't come crying to us when you're buried in debt and have nothing to show for your life." I never asked them for a single dime. For 7 brutal years, I lived in a cramped, unheated studio apartment above a 24-hour laundromat. I worked 30 hours a week as a nighttime legal research assistant, survived on canned beans and discount coffee, and spent 16 hours a day studying constitutional law, civil procedure, and judicial precedent. When I passed the bar exam in the top 2% of the state, I took a position as a deputy district attorney in the Public Integrity Division. The salary was modest, the hours were grueling, and the work was dangerous. But I wasn't in it for flash or applause. I was mastering the machinery of justice from the ground up. Every time I visited my parents' home for Thanksgiving or Christmas, the humiliation was relentless. Vanessa would arrive in a leased European luxury SUV, wearing fur coats and diamond-studded bracelets, boasting about high-end clients she had supposedly secured for her firm, Lux Habitat Interiors. My mother would place Vanessa at the head of the dining table next to my father while I was seated on a folding chair at the corner near the kitchen door. "Look at your sister, Camille," my mother would sneer, waving a diamond-ringed hand across the table. "She's only 26 and already driving an $80,000 car. Meanwhile, you're 30 years old, driving that rusted sedan, wearing off-the-rack suits and making pennies for the state. You could have been somebody if you had Vanessa's ambition. Instead, you're just a broke nobody reading papers for a living." My father would chime in, shaking his head. "It's a tragedy, really. But some people are born to lead, and some people are born to be clerical workers. Pass the potatoes, Camille, at least make yourself useful." I never argued with them. I never yelled. I never pulled out my bank statements or explained that while Vanessa was burning through lease debt, I had quietly invested in municipal bonds, purchased 2 debt-free rental properties, and was being vetted by the State Judicial Nominating Commission for a historic district bench appointment. I kept my mouth shut, finished my meal, and went back to my work. Because in the legal system, there is an iron rule. The louder someone brags about unearned wealth, the closer they are to a federal indictment. And in late 2025, Vanessa's house of cards finally collapsed. It turned out that Lux Habitat Interiors was nothing more than an elaborate, predatory Ponzi scheme. Vanessa had been taking 6-figure upfront cash retainers from high-profile residential clients, promising imported Italian marble and bespoke custom furniture, and using the new clients' deposits to pay off the overdue debts of previous projects, while pocketing hundreds of thousands of dollars to fund her private lifestyle. When 4 prominent commercial clients discovered that their architectural materials were never ordered and their escrow funds had been drained to pay for Vanessa's luxury vacations to Aspen and Dubai, they filed formal criminal complaints with the State Attorney General's white-collar fraud unit. Vanessa was indicted on 3 felony counts of grand larceny, scheme to defraud, and fraudulent concealment of commercial funds totaling $480,000. My parents, frantic with terror, took out a desperate $300,000 emergency hard money loan against their home to retain a high-profile criminal defense attorney, convinced that their daughter was merely the victim of jealous clients. Because I had severed regular contact with them 18 months earlier after my historic judicial appointment, they had no idea which district or division I had been assigned to. To them, I was still the broke nobody hiding in a government cubicle. Which brings us back to Wednesday morning in courtroom 4A. Vanessa stood at the defense podium, her legs shaking so visibly that her attorney had to place a steadying hand beneath her elbow. Behind her, my mother was clutching her chest, tears cutting black streaks through her foundation, staring up at the raised mahogany judicial bench where her eldest daughter sat in judgment over the state's docket. My father sat frozen on the courtroom bench, his face completely drained of color, his hands trembling over his knees. The daughter he had told to pass the potatoes because she was useless was now the sole arbiter of his favorite child's freedom. Vanessa's defense attorney, a veteran litigator named Richard Sterling, stepped forward and cleared his throat nervously. "Your Honor," Sterling began, his voice lacking its usual courtroom swagger, "we are here for the preliminary arraignment and bail determination. My client is a respected local entrepreneur with deep ties to the community. We are requesting an unsecured release on personal recognizance, or a nominal bail bond." "Mr. Sterling," I interrupted, my voice calm, flat, and carrying the full weight of the bench, "I have thoroughly reviewed the state's preliminary evidentiary filings, the financial forensic audit, and the certified banking records attached to the indictment." I picked up the thick blue case binder on my desk. "Your client," I continued, looking directly down at Vanessa, whose eyes were wide with sheer terror, is charged with running an ongoing fraudulent enterprise that systematically defrauded 6 separate families out of $480,000 over a 24-month period. Furthermore, the state's financial affidavit demonstrates that 48 hours after receiving notice of the grand jury subpoena, your client attempted to transfer $120,000 into an unlisted offshore account in Belize. Vanessa let out a choked sob, grabbing the edges of the defense podium. Your Honor, Camille. Please, it was an accounting mistake. You know me. I'm your sister. The entire courtroom went dead silent. Richard Sterling closed his eyes in sheer agony, realizing his client had just committed the ultimate courtroom blunder. I did not flinch. I did not show anger. I lowered my glasses and looked at her with pure judicial impartiality. The defendant will refrain from addressing the bench by personal names, I stated, my voice echoing like a steel door closing. Under Canon 3 of the Code of Judicial Conduct, any personal acquaintance or familial relation to a defendant requires immediate disclosure on the public record. For the record, the defendant is my biological sibling, from whom I have been completely estranged for several years. I looked at the prosecuting assistant attorney general, then back at the defense table. Under standard judicial procedure, this bench would typically recuse itself and transfer this matter to District Court 4B. However, regarding the immediate matter of preliminary bail and asset preservation pending reassignment, this court retains statutory jurisdiction to ensure public protect, tie-in and prevent the destruction of evidence. I picked up my pen, signed the preliminary detention order, and looked down at the defense table. Given the documented attempt to liquidate assets and transfer funds to foreign jurisdictions, the court finds the defendant to be a substantial flight risk. Bail is set at $500,000, cash or certified surety only. Furthermore, the court orders an immediate freeze on all personal and commercial bank accounts associated with the defendant and Lux Habitat Interiors, along with the surrender of all international passports within 2 hours. Vanessa shrieked, collapsing onto the defense chair. $500,000. I don't have $500,000. Mom, Dad, help me. My mother jumped up from the gallery bench, screaming across the divider. Camille, you monster. You are destroying your own sister. You know we don't have that kind of money. Drop this immediately. I am your mother. I brought the heavy wooden gavel down onto the sound block with a single thunderous crack. Bang. The sound echoed through the high-ceilinged room like a gunshot. Bailiff, I commanded calmly, remove the spectator in the second row for contempt of court. If she utters another word inside this facility, remand her to the holding cell for 24 hours. 2 armed judicial marshals immediately moved in, took my mother by the elbows, and forcefully guided her through the heavy double doors into the hallway, where her frantic wails were cut off by the closing oak doors. My father sat motionless, his head bowed, weeping silently into his hands as the reality of their absolute ruin settled over him. I looked down at the defense table one last time. The defendant is remanded into the custody of the county sheriff pending formal transfer of the master trial docket to Division 4B. Court is adjourned. Bang! I stood up, turned, and walked through the private judicial chamber doors, the black silk of my robe trailing behind me. In the hallway behind the bench, my senior law clerk, Marcus, handed me the reassignment paperwork with a respectful nod. Transfer order is filed, Judge Vance. Division 4B will handle the trial proceedings starting next month. Thank you, Marcus, I said quietly, taking a deep breath of the quiet chamber air. Over the following 5 months, the legal and financial destruction of the Vance family was total. Because their accounts were frozen and no lender would accept my father's heavily encumbered house as collateral for a $500,000 bail bond, Vanessa spent 90 days in the county detention center awaiting trial. Faced with 42 pages of undeniable forensic bank records, canceled checks, and whistleblower testimony from her former contractors, Vanessa's defense collapsed. She entered a guilty plea to 2 counts of felony grand larceny. The presiding judge in Division 4B sentenced Vanessa to 4 years in the state correctional facility, ordered full restitution of $480,000, and permanently revoked her corporate business licenses. To settle the restitution judgments and avoid criminal bankruptcy fraud charges, my parents were forced to liquidate their suburban home at a massive loss. They moved into a tiny rundown one-bedroom apartment in a dilapidated senior community 30 miles outside the city, surviving solely on my father's reduced state pension. 2 weeks ago, I received a certified letter delivered to my home address. It was from my father. His handwriting was shaky, fragile, and aged. Camille, I don't expect you to forgive us. I spent 10 years calling you a nobody because I was too blind, too proud, and too cowardly to admit that you were the only person in our family who had true strength. You built your life on truth while we built ours on lies. Your mother and I are living with the consequences of our choices every single day. I am so sorry. I read the letter once sitting in my study, surrounded by my law books, watching the evening sun set over the city skyline. I did not write back. I did not call. I took the letter, placed it inside my private judicial archive folder, closed the drawer, and locked it. People often ask why standing firm against family arrogance is so necessary. It is necessary because people who judge your worth by how much flash, noise, and unearned luxury you display will always despise your discipline. They mock your hard work because your quiet success is a constant, living indictment of their shallow entitlement. True success is not measured by leased sports cars, fake smiles, or stolen money. It is measured by the integrity of the foundation you build when no one is watching. Never let anyone make you feel small for choosing the long, honest road. Keep your head down, do the work, master your craft, and let time prove that while arrogance builds castles on sand, discipline builds empires that no storm can ever tear down. If you were in my position on that bench, would you have set a $500,000 bail on your own sister, or did she get the exact justice she deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.